What happens when a man built on control meets a woman who refuses to be controlled? On a cold November morning, Sophie walked down the aisle toward a man who saw her as nothing more than a contract. Caleb, the ruthless CEO, whispered words meant to break her. "I will never touch you." But Sophie wasn't the type of woman who settled for less than she deserved. With a searing kiss, she shattered his walls and set something ablaze that neither of them could escape. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like and become a member for early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, also click the super thanks button. Your support makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing stories that move you. The chapel smelled of aged wood and white lilies, too many lilies, their heavy perfume clinging to the air like a warning Sophie couldn't decipher. Outside, November rain beat against the stained glass windows, casting fractured colors across the empty pews. Only a handful of witnesses sat scattered throughout the vast space. Her father, pale and trembling in his wheelchair. Caleb's stone-faced assistant, a judge who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. This wasn't anyone's dream wedding. It was a business transaction dressed in white satin. Sophie walked slowly down the aisle, each step echoing like a funeral drum. The silk dress hugged her body, but she felt like she was wearing armor. Her hands trembled holding the bouquet of white roses, thorns hidden beneath perfect petals, just like this moment. Beautiful on the outside, painful within. Up front, Caleb Montgomery waited with the posture of an indifferent king. Impeccable black suit, clenched jaw, gray eyes that could freeze hell itself. He didn't even smile as she approached. He just looked her up and down with an expression somewhere between boredom and clinical approval, like someone inspecting a newly acquired investment. The judge conducted the ceremony with mechanical haste. The words sounded distant, muffled by thunder rumbling beyond the walls. Sophie answered with a steady voice when her turn came, refusing to let her vulnerability show. Caleb recited his vows with all the emotion of someone signing a corporate contract. "You may kiss the bride." Caleb leaned in mechanically, aiming for a chaste, quick kiss on her lips, the kind of kiss that would seal the deal without creating unnecessary expectations. But Sophie felt something crack inside her. Anger, indignation, defiance. She hadn't asked to be here, hadn't chosen this arranged marriage to save her father's failing company. But if she was going to live this nightmare, it would be on her own terms. So she pulled him back. Her fingers grabbed his lapel with unexpected force, bringing him back before he could pull away. Caleb's eyes widened for a fraction of a second, the first genuine reaction she'd seen from him all day, and then she kissed him. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was fire and fury. Her lips collided with his with searing intensity, demanding, challenging, claiming. For an instant, Caleb froze, his hands suspended in the air, completely disarmed by her audacity. But then something changed. His hands found her waist, touching her through the thin silk with pressure that was both hesitant and possessive. His lips responded, moving against hers with a hunger he clearly hadn't intended to reveal. The kiss deepened, their tongues meeting briefly, teasing, testing boundaries. The world around them disappeared, the embarrassed judge, the slack-jawed assistant, even her father watching with renewed hope. There was only heat, only the pressure of his lips against hers, only the taste of mint and danger, only his hands burning through the fabric, holding her as if she might escape. Sophie felt his body tense against hers, felt his breath hitch, felt something primitive and uncontrollable awaken between them. For those stolen seconds, Caleb Montgomery wasn't the cold, calculating billionaire CEO. He was just a man being consumed by a woman who refused to be ignored. When she finally pulled away, her lips were red and swollen, her breathing uneven. She stared at him with provocative eyes, one eyebrow arched in silent challenge. His face was flushed, a crack in the ice facade. "I'm not going to settle for less than I deserve, darling," she whispered, just for him to hear. Her voice was husky, loaded with promise and threat. Caleb stared at her, still processing what had just happened. His jaw tightened, but his eyes devoured her with an intensity that made her stomach flip. There was anger there, surprise, and something far more dangerous, desire. The reception was a polite farce, Half a dozen guests pretending interest in expensive champagne and canapes, no one touched. Sophie smiled mechanically as she greeted strangers who were clearly only there out of corporate obligation. But then came time for the first dance. The music began, a slow, melancholic waltz that echoed through the nearly empty hall. Caleb extended his hand with visible reluctance. Sophie accepted it, letting him lead her to the center of the ballroom. Their hands met. His, large and warm, enveloped hers completely. His other hand settled on her waist with a firm, proprietary touch. Sophie placed her free hand on his shoulder, feeling the tense muscles beneath the expensive fabric. They began to dance. It was strange, this forced proximity with a man who was technically her husband, but remained a complete stranger. Their bodies moved in rehearsed synchronicity, but there was tension in every touch, in every shared breath. Caleb led her with impeccable precision, but his face remained an impassive mask. That's when he leaned in, his lips grazing her ear, as he whispered in a low, cutting voice, "Don't fool yourself about that kiss, it was just a performance. I will never touch you." The words cut like glass. Sophie's blood instantly boiled. Her hand clenched on his shoulder, nails pressing through his jacket. She turned her face, her lips dangerously close to his. "Is that what you think?" she murmured, her eyes blazing. Before he could respond, before he could pull back, she pulled him in again, kissed him right there in the middle of the dance floor, in front of all the remaining witnesses. This kiss was even more intense than the first. There was nothing performative about it. It was pure defiance, pure provocation. Their mouths collided with desperate urgency, tongues tangling, teeth grazing lips. His hands tightened on her waist reflexively, pulling her closer, until there was no space between their bodies. Sophie bit his lower lip lightly, drawing a guttural sound from his throat. She felt his erection pressing against her stomach through the layers of clothing, undeniable proof that his cold words were lies. When she pulled away this time, she kept her eyes locked on his. Her breathing was ragged, her lips wet and red, but her voice came out steady and clear. "You can lie to yourself, Caleb, but your body doesn't lie." She stepped away then, leaving him planted in the middle of the dance floor, breathing unevenly, eyes dark with unmet desire. The sexual tension had been born there, and it burned with every glance exchanged for the rest of the night. The Montgomery mansion rose against the night sky like a monument to ruthless success, all glass, steel, and architectural lines that screamed absolute control. Sophie stepped out of the limousine and looked up, feeling the weight of those walls that would be her gilded prison. The interior lights glowed cold through the immense windows, revealing minimalist interiors where everything seemed calculated, measured, stripped of soul. Caleb exited the car without a word, his steps echoing on the polished stone path. He didn't offer his hand, didn't look back to see if she was following. He simply walked toward the entrance as if returning from just another day at the office. Not his own wedding ceremony. The interior was even more intimidating. Marble floors reflected the recessed LED lights. Minimalist designer furniture looked more like sculptures than places to sit. Abstract artwork, probably wildly expensive, hung on white walls but conveyed no warmth or personality. Everything was perfect. Everything was frigid. "Your suite is on the second floor, east wing," Caleb said without looking at her, removing his jacket and tossing it over a leather armchair. He loosened his tie with precise movements, his fingers working the knot as he finally turned to face her. "Margaret, the housekeeper, has your things organized. If you need anything, there's an intercom in every room." Sophie felt her blood boil again. "Separate suites, then?" "Of course." He looked at her as if the question were absurd. "I made the terms of this arrangement very clear." "Terms." The word came out bitter from her lips. Sophie let her purse drop to the marble floor with a dull thud that echoed through the vast room. "You talk like I'm a corporate contract, not your wife." "That's exactly what you are." Caleb walked to the built-in bar, pouring himself an amber scotch that glowed under the light. He drank half in one swallow, his eyes finally meeting hers over the rim of the glass. "A contract, a business arrangement benefiting both parties. You gained financial security for your father, I gained, well, appearances matter in my circle." The words should have hurt. But Sophie had already expected cruelty. She'd seen it in his eyes from the moment they met 3 weeks ago, when the lawyers presented the obscene proposal: marry Caleb Montgomery and your father's debts would disappear. Refuse, and everything would be lost. She'd had no choice. But choice or not, she wouldn't be reduced to expensive furniture in this soulless house. Appearances, Sophie repeated, her heels clicking against the marble as she walked toward him. The silk of her dress whispered with each step, molding to her body in ways she knew he noticed, despite his mask of indifference. Was it for appearances that your body reacted when I kissed you? Twice? His jaw visibly tightened. He set the glass on the counter with controlled force, the sound of glass against granite cutting through the tense silence. That was an involuntary physical reaction. It doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean anything, she echoed, stopping a few steps away from him, close enough to feel the heat emanating from his body, close enough to see the vein pulsing in his neck, close enough to notice his hands closing into fists as if he were fighting the urge to touch her. Then why are you still looking at me that way? What are you talking about? But his voice came out huskier than he'd intended. The way you look at my mouth, my neck. Like you want to... She tilted her head, letting her hair fall over one shoulder, exposing the pale line of her throat. Like you want to prove you can ignore me. But your body is betraying you. Caleb stepped forward, suddenly invading her space. He was tall, she'd forgotten how much, and his presence engulfed her completely. His scent invaded her senses, something woody mixed with scotch, with a note of masculine sweat that should have been unpleasant, but wasn't. Don't provoke me, Sophie. The words came out as a dangerous warning. His eyes, which moments ago had seemed made of ice, now burned with something primitive and uncontrollable. She tilted her chin up defiantly, refusing to back down, even though every instinct screamed how dangerous it was to provoke this man. Then don't underestimate me. The silence that followed was charged, electric. They were so close that Sophie could see the golden flecks in his grey eyes, could count every dark lash, could feel his breath grazing her parted lips. Caleb's hands moved. For a second, she thought he was going to touch her, pull her in, kiss her with the same fury she'd kissed him. His fingers rose, hesitated in the air between them, trembling slightly. But then he pulled back abruptly, as if he'd been burned. Go to your room, Sophie. His voice was rough, unsteady. He turned his back, bracing his hands on the bar counter, shoulders tense. It'll be easier for both of us if you keep your distance. Easier? Sophie felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat. You think it's going to be easy, living in this cold house, pretending we don't exist to each other? That's exactly what we're going to do. He grabbed the scotch bottle and refilled his glass, downing it in one gulp. We have our separate lives. You have complete freedom to do whatever you want. Paint, go out, take your art classes. I won't interfere. I just need you to appear by my side at public events when necessary. And if I don't want this life? Sophie crossed her arms, feeling tears burning in the corners of her eyes. Tears of anger, not sadness. She blinked furiously, refusing to cry in front of him. Then you should have thought about that before signing the marriage contract. The coldness of those words was like a slap. Sophie felt something break inside her. Not her spirit, but perhaps her last illusions that this man might have an ounce of humanity hidden beneath all that corporate armor. You're a coward, she said calmly, each word loaded with controlled venom. You hide behind contracts and rules because you're afraid to feel anything real. Caleb spun around so fast she instinctively stepped back. His eyes were wild now, all composure shattered. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, stopping so close their chests nearly touched. You don't know anything about me, he growled, and for the first time Sophie saw genuine emotion in him. Anger, pain, something wounded and dangerous. Then let me know you. Her voice came out softer now, almost a whisper. She raised her hand hesitantly, her fingers hovering inches from his face. Let me see who you really are beneath all this coldness. For an endless moment he just stared at her. His eyes traveled over every feature of her face, the curve of her flushed cheeks, the shine of her lips still swollen from earlier kisses, the green eyes that challenged and pleaded with him simultaneously. His breathing was ragged. She could see his accelerated pulse in his throat, could feel the radiant heat from his body. He was going to kiss her. Sophie was certain. She could see it in the way his eyes fixed on her mouth, in the way his body leaned almost imperceptibly toward hers. But then, once again, he pulled away. "Good night, Sophie." The words came out tired, defeated. He grabbed his jacket and walked toward the glass staircase leading to the upper floor. "Margaret will show you to your room first thing in the morning." She watched him climb the stairs, each step echoing in the silent vastness of the house. When he disappeared down the second-floor hallway, Sophie finally allowed the tears to fall, but they weren't tears of defeat. They were tears of determination. Caleb Montgomery thought he could keep her at a distance with rules and coldness, but she'd seen the truth in those stolen moments. He desired her as much as she desired him, and Sophie wasn't the type of woman who accepted being ignored. If he wanted war, she'd give him war. But it would be a war waged with glances, provocative touches, and the slow demolition of every wall he'd built around his heart. Morning arrived cold and grey, pale December light filtering through the linen curtains of Sophie's suite. She woke disoriented for a moment, her eyes scanning the minimalist room, all white and beige, not a single photograph, not a trace of lived life. It was like waking up inside a decorating magazine. Beautiful, impeccable, and absolutely empty. She got up and walked to the panoramic window. Below, the garden stretched out in perfect geometric lines, each shrub trimmed with military precision, each stone path aligned as if measured with a ruler. Not a leaf out of place, not a touch of chaos or spontaneity. Exactly like the man who owned it all. Sophie showered and dressed simply, dark jeans and a cream cotton blouse. She wasn't going to dress up to impress anyone in this house. She went downstairs and found Margaret, the middle-aged housekeeper with a kind face and perceptive eyes, preparing coffee in the absurdly modern kitchen. "Good morning, Mrs. Montgomery," Margaret greeted with a warm smile, the first sign of humanity Sophie had encountered in this place. "Mr. Caleb has already left for the office. He left instructions for you to make yourself at home." Of course he did. He fled before even having to face her in the light of day. Sophie had coffee alone at the dining table that could easily seat 20 people, the sound of her cup touching the saucer echoing through the empty space. The loneliness was palpable, suffocating. She imagined years unfolding like this. Solitary meals, separate nights, a life lived in parallel with a stranger who shared her last name but nothing else. No, she wouldn't accept this. After coffee, Sophie explored the house. There was a library with floor-to-ceiling shelves, but the books looked like they'd never been touched. A gym with state-of-the-art equipment covered in a thin layer of dust. A home theater that had probably never shown a movie. And then she found his office. The door was ajar. Sophie hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. The room smelled of leather and paper, with a subtle note of Caleb's expensive cologne. The walls were lined with corporate awards, framed certificates, photographs of him shaking hands with politicians and CEOs. But no personal photos, no record of family, friends, moments of joy. On the solid mahogany desk, perfectly organized files. Sophie wasn't one to snoop, but something caught her attention, a folder with her name handwritten on the label. Her heart raced. She opened it. They were investigation reports, about her father. Pages and pages detailing every aspect of their lives, her father's illness, the accumulated debts, her work as an art teacher in a public school, the nights she sold her paintings at street fairs to pay medical bills. There were even photographs of her smiling at children in her classroom, of her with paint on her hands working on a canvas, of her visiting her father in the hospital. He had investigated everything, studied every detail of her life before proposing this arranged marriage. She was an analyzed investment, not a person. The tears burned, but this time Sophie let them fall. She sat in his leather chair and cried, not from self-pity, but from anger and frustration at being reduced to data in a folder. That's how Caleb found her. "What are you doing in my office?" His voice cut through the silence, icy and accusatory. Sophie raised her eyes, not bothering to wipe away the tears streaming down her face. "Discovering what kind of man I was forced to marry." Caleb entered, closing the door behind him. He was still in a suit, charcoal grey this time. Impeccable tie, hair perfectly combed. But there was something different in his face when he saw the open folder on the desk. Guilt, perhaps, or discomfort. Those are routine investigations, he said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. Routine? Sophie stood, holding the folder with trembling hands. You catalogued my entire life like I was a corporate acquisition. My habits, my dreams, my financial struggles, all exposed and analyzed. I needed to know who I was getting involved with. Involved? She laughed without humor, throwing the folder back on the desk. The pages scattered. You're not involved with me, Caleb. You bought me. There's a difference. He clenched his jaw, his grey eyes darkening. I saved your father from bankruptcy, paid all his medical debts, made sure he had the best treatments available. Don't talk like I'm the villain. You think money erases the fact that you took away any choice I had? Her voice trembled but remained firm. I had a life, Caleb. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I painted because I loved it. I taught children because I believed art could save them like it saved me. I woke up every day with purpose. And now you have security, comfort. You don't have to worry about, I don't want security. The words exploded from her. I want to live. I want to feel. I want to be seen as a human being, not as a line in your investment portfolio. The silence that followed was thick, charged. Caleb stared at her as if seeing her for the first time, really seeing her, beyond the collected data, beyond the convenient surface. Sophie took a deep breath, wiping her face with the back of her hand. When she spoke again, her voice was calmer, but loaded with raw emotion. You want to know who I am? It's not in those reports. She pointed to the folder. I grew up poor but rich in love. My mother died when I was 12. Cancer. My father worked 3 jobs to give me an education, to give me paint and canvases when he discovered I had talent. Caleb remained motionless, but something was changing in his expression, the armor cracking millimeter by millimeter. I graduated in fine arts on a full scholarship. I could have gone to New York, to important galleries, but my father got sick and I came back. I taught art to children from underprivileged communities because I was one of them. Because art gave me hope when there was none. Her voice broke slightly. And when the debts became unbearable, when the doctors said he needed an experimental treatment that was insanely expensive, I prayed for a miracle. And I appeared, Caleb murmured, more to himself than to her. You appeared, she confirmed, her eyes fixed on his, with your impossible proposal. Marry me, and I'll save your father. So I had to choose, my freedom or his life. Sophie, for the first time there was something like regret in his voice. No. She raised her hand, stopping him. You want to know more? I've never been with anyone, Caleb. Never gave my body to any man. I had boyfriends, sure, kisses, promises, but I saved myself because I believed in true love, because my mother taught me that intimacy is sacred. His breath caught visibly. His eyes widened, body going rigid. You're a virgin? I was. She smiled sadly. Until I signed that contract and became the property of a man who doesn't even want to touch me. You're lying, but there was no conviction in his words, only shock, disbelief. I'd have no reason to lie. Only truth can hurt this much. She took a step toward him, her eyes brimming but steady. I gave myself to this marriage completely, Caleb. I gave my freedom, my dreams, even my innocence, because, for me, marriage meant total commitment. And you gave nothing but money. Caleb ran his hand through his hair, undoing the usual perfection. He looked shaken, the foundations of his certainties trembling. I didn't know. Nobody told me that I was human, Sophie completed. That I had feelings, dreams, that I wasn't just numbers on a page. He looked at her then. Really looked. His eyes traveled over her face as if memorizing every feature, every tear still wet on her cheeks, the raw vulnerability she no longer hid. And something shifted in his expression. The coldness melted, replaced by something too complex to name. Desire, yes, but also reverence, guilt, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of real respect. You're strong, he finally said, his voice husky, stronger than I imagined. Don't underestimate me again. He nodded slowly, taking another step toward her. They were close now, the space between them charged with everything that had been said and everything that remained silent. "I was unfair to you," Caleb admitted, and the words seemed to cost him physical effort. "I judged you without knowing you. I reduced you to a means to an end." "Why?" Sophie asked, genuinely curious. "Why do you need appearances so badly? Why do you hide behind contracts and coldness?" He looked away, jaw tight. "Because it's safer that way." "Safe from what?" But he didn't answer. He just stood there, fighting a visible internal battle, fists clenched at his sides as if stopping himself from reaching for her. Sophie took the final step, closing the distance between them. She raised her hand and hesitantly touched his face, just her fingers against the strong line of his jaw. He trembled under her touch, but didn't pull away. "I'll be here," she whispered, "when you're ready to be real with me. When you want to stop pretending you don't feel anything." His eyes met hers again, and there was a storm there, desire and fear at war. "You don't know what you're asking," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Then show me." The challenge hung in the air. Caleb raised his hand, his fingers touching hers where they still rested on his face. For a moment, they just looked at each other, two strangers beginning to see each other for the first time. The December afternoon sun streamed through the mansion's stained glass, painting golden patterns across the marble floors. Sophie spent the following days exploring every corner of this luxury prison, searching for a space she could call her own, a place where the architectural coldness would give way to something with life, with soul. It was on the third day that she found the back garden. Unlike the front gardens with their suffocating geometry, this area seemed forgotten by the obsessive landscaper. There was a stone bench under a pergola covered with dormant wisteria, flower beds where wild roses insisted on growing despite the neglect, and a small fountain where water dripped in irregular rhythm, creating an imperfect and curiously comforting melody. Sophie brought her portable easel, her paints, her brushes, the only belongings that really mattered. Margaret had managed to bring them from the old house, along with some clothes and books. Now set up in the garden with a blanket over her shoulders to ward off the cold, Sophie finally felt like she could breathe. She painted without a specific goal, just let the color flow, deep reds bleeding into vibrant oranges, melancholic blues meeting stormy violets. It was therapy. It was survival. It was the only way she knew to process the emotional whirlwind of the past few days. The sound of footsteps on gravel made her look up. Caleb stood a few meters away, still wearing his worksuit, but with his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd run his fingers through it repeatedly, a sign of stress that Sophie was beginning to recognize. He said nothing, just watched her with an expression she couldn't completely decipher. There was curiosity there, but also something softer, something vulnerable. "I didn't know you came home this early," Sophie commented, returning her attention to the canvas, pretending his presence didn't make her heart race. "Finishing work at the office is boring." He hesitated, as if the next words cost him effort. "I thought I'd come back earlier." Sophie dipped her brush in crimson, tracing broad lines across the canvas. "To check if your investment is still here?" "Sophie," there was weariness in his voice, "I deserve that. I know I deserve it. But I came to apologize, really apologize." She stopped, the brush suspended in the air. Slowly she turned to face him. The golden afternoon light bathed his face, softening the hard lines, revealing the shadows under his eyes, as if he wasn't sleeping well either. "Why?" she asked simply. "Because you were right about everything." He swallowed hard, hands in his pockets as if he didn't know what to do with them. "I treated you like a business deal when you deserved to be treated as the extraordinary woman you are." The words caught her off guard. Sophie blinked, feeling warmth rise up her neck. "You don't know me well enough to know if I'm extraordinary. Then let me get to know you." He echoed the words she'd said in the office, but this time they sounded like genuine pleading, not challenge. Sophie studied him for a long moment. There was sincerity in his eyes, those grey eyes that so often seemed like cold steel, but now reflected something warmer, more human. "You can sit," she finally said, gesturing to the stone bench beside the easel. Caleb crossed the space between them with measured steps, as if fearing an abrupt movement might break the fragile understanding beginning to form. He sat down, his long legs stretched out in front, his shoulder nearly touching hers due to the bench's limited size. The silence that settled wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged with possibilities, with unspoken words hovering in the air between them, like the dry leaves that the December wind made dance through the garden. Sophie returned to painting, aware of his every movement beside her, the way he adjusted his posture, the sound of his breathing, the heat emanating from his body even through the layers of clothing. "What are you painting?" Caleb asked after a few minutes. "I don't know yet." Sophie tilted her head, studying the abstract shapes on the canvas. "Sometimes I just let the colors guide me, see what emerges." "How do you know when it's finished?" "When it feels honest." She dipped her brush in deep blue, adding shadows at the edges. "When it captures something true, even if I can't name what it is." Caleb watched her hands move, the paint-stained fingers dancing across the canvas, with a confidence that contrasted with the hesitation he'd seen in other aspects of her life in this house. "It's beautiful," he murmured, "watching you create something from nothing." Sophie paused, turning her face toward him. They were so close, and only inches separating their faces. She could see the fine lines around his eyes, the shadow of stubble beginning to appear on his jaw, the way his lips parted slightly as he stared at her. "It's not from nothing," she corrected gently. "It comes from inside, from everything I feel and can't say." "And what do you feel?" The question came out almost in a whisper, too intimate for how little time they'd known each other. Sophie looked away first, returning to the canvas. Loneliness, anger, hope, fear. She added another brushstroke. Desire. The last word hung between them like a dangerous confession. "Sophie," Caleb began, but didn't seem to know how to continue. She set the brush on the easel and turned completely toward him, her knees touching his legs. "Why did you choose me, Caleb? Of all the women your investigators must have catalogued, why me?" He tensed, his jaw working as he searched for words. His eyes traveled over her face, the forehead stained with an accidental touch of blue paint, the cheeks flushed from cold and concentration, the lips slightly parted, awaiting an answer. "Because you were safe," he finally admitted, his voice hoarse. "You needed me. You had no options. I thought that meant you would be compliant, grateful, easy to control." The brutal honesty hurt, but Sophie appreciated it more than kind lies. "And now," she challenged, "do you still think I'm easy to control?" A minimal smile, almost imperceptible, touched his lips. "No. Now I think you're the most dangerous woman I've ever met." "Dangerous?" "To me. To everything I've built." He raised his hand hesitantly, fingers hovering near her face as if asking silent permission. Sophie didn't move, barely dared to breathe. Caleb touched her then, just his fingertips sliding along her temple, brushing away a strand of hair the wind had displaced. The touch was gentle, almost reverent, completely different from the urgency of the kisses they'd shared. Her skin tingled where he touched. She felt her breath catch, her heart race against her ribs. "Why dangerous?" she managed to whisper. His fingers traced the line of her jaw, slowly exploring. "Because you make me want things I swore I'd never want again. Because you break my rules just by existing." His voice was low, intimate, loaded with emotion he no longer tried to hide. "Because when I look at you, I forget all the reasons I protect myself." Sophie turned her face into his touch, her lips grazing his palm. She felt him shiver. "What are you protecting yourself from?" she asked against his skin. "From feeling." The words came out broken. "From caring. From losing again." There was history in those words. Old pain, scars she didn't know but could sense. Sophie covered his hand with hers, intertwining their fingers. "We've all lost something," she said softly. "But living in fear of losing more is just another form of death." Caleb stared at her with an intensity that made her insides twist. "You're so much wiser than I am. Not wise, just tired of surviving when I could be living." They stayed like that, hands intertwined, faces close, breaths slowly synchronizing. The world around them disappeared. The cold air, the dripping fountain, even the vibrant colors of the unfinished painting. There was only the shared warmth, the space diminishing between them, the silent promise of something beginning to bloom despite the infertile soil. "You're so much more than I imagined," Caleb murmured, his eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her feel exposed and seen at the same time. "So are you," Sophie responded honestly. He smiled then, a small, genuine smile that completely transformed his face. The hard lines softened, his eyes sparkled with something warm, and Sophie realized it was the first time she'd seen him really smile. She smiled back, feeling something release in her chest. Hope, perhaps, or just the possibility that this forced marriage could become something more, something real. The sun was beginning to set, tinting the sky pink and orange. Shadows lengthened across the garden, but neither of them moved. They sat there, shoulders touching, hands intertwined in comfortable silence that said more than 1,000 words could. When it finally grew dark and the cold became too intense to ignore, Caleb stood first, extending his hand to help her up. Sophie accepted, her paint-stained fingers sliding into his. "Tomorrow," he said as they walked back to the house, their hands still joined. "Let me show you something." "What?" Sophie asked, curious. "A surprise." His eyes gleamed with mischief she didn't expect from him. "Trust me?" She should say no, should keep her distance, protect herself. But looking at the man beside her, no longer the cold CEO but someone beginning to reveal himself, Sophie found she wanted to trust. "Yes," she whispered. "I trust you." The smile he gave in response was worth every risk. Sophie woke to the sound of soft knocking on her suite door. Morning light filtered through the curtains, bathing the white room in golden tones. She sat up in bed, her disheveled hair falling over her shoulders, still wearing the simple cotton pajamas she'd brought from home. "Come in," she called, expecting to see Margaret with the breakfast tray. But it was Caleb who opened the door. He looked different, without his usual corporate suit. He wore dark jeans and a grey cashmere sweater that molded to his chest in a way that made Sophie's heart race involuntarily. His hair was more tousled than normal, as if he'd just gotten out of the shower. And there was something in his eyes, a contained excitement almost youthful, that she'd never seen before. "Good morning," he said, standing in the doorway, as if unsure whether he could enter. "Sorry to show up so early, but I have that surprise." Sophie pulled the blanket up to her waist, suddenly aware of how little she was wearing. "Now? What time is it?" 8 in the morning. He smiled, that small but genuine smile she'd seen yesterday, and that completely transformed his face. "Get dressed, something comfortable. I'll wait for you downstairs." Before she could respond, he closed the door, leaving her alone with her heart pounding and 1,000 questions swirling in her mind. 20 minutes later, Sophie came down the stairs wearing jeans, boots, and a wine-colored sweater. Caleb was waiting in the hall, holding 2 coffee mugs. He extended one to her, their fingers brushing during the transfer. A brief but electric touch. "Thank you," Sophie murmured, taking a sip. The coffee was perfect, with exactly the amount of milk she liked. He'd been paying attention. "Come with me," Caleb said, gesturing for her to follow. They crossed the house toward the wing Sophie hadn't fully explored yet. They passed through a hallway with glass walls overlooking the side gardens, then climbed a narrow staircase leading to the 3rd floor. Caleb stopped before a double door of dark wood. His hands hovered over the handles, and he turned to her with an almost nervous expression. "I don't show this to anyone," he admitted. "But after yesterday, seeing you paint, I thought maybe you'd appreciate it." He opened the doors. Sophie entered and her breath caught. It was a studio, enormous, bathed in natural light entering through skylights in the ceiling and windows that occupied an entire wall, offering a panoramic view of the gardens and mountains in the distance. The floor was light wood covered with old paint splatters, evidence of real use, not just decoration. There were easels of different sizes, a long workbench full of paint tubes organized by color, brushes of all kinds in ceramic pots, blank canvases stacked against the walls. And at the back, on an exposed brick wall, hung paintings. Sophie walked toward them as if in a trance, her eyes scanning each canvas. They were landscapes mostly, some abstract, others more realistic. Mountains under stormy skies, oceans in shades of grey and deep blue, forests shrouded in mist. There was talent there, but also melancholy, Each brushstroke conveyed loneliness, searching something incomplete. "You painted these?" she asked, turning to Caleb with wide eyes. He was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her with a vulnerable expression. "A long time ago. Before I became who I am now." Sophie returned her attention to the paintings, studying them with new understanding. "They're beautiful. Sad, but beautiful. I stopped after—" He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "After some things happened in my life, it seemed frivolous, a waste of time. I had a company to build, an empire to raise. And you locked this part of yourself in here?" It wasn't a question. "Yes." The word came out heavy. Sophie walked toward him slowly, her eyes fixed on his. "Why are you showing me this now?" Caleb uncrossed his arms, his hands going to his pockets, his characteristic nervous gesture. "Because yesterday, watching you create, I remembered what it was like to release something from inside through colors, and I thought maybe you'd like a better space than a cold garden to paint in." Sophie's heart squeezed. "You're giving me the studio? If you want it." He shrugged, trying to seem casual but failing completely. "Or we can share it. I haven't used it in years. It would be a waste for it to stay empty." Tears burned in her eyes. Sophie blinked furiously, trying to hold them back, but it was useless. They began to stream silently down her cheeks. "Sophie?" Caleb straightened immediately, concern crossing his face. "Did I do something wrong? If you don't like it—" "No." She shook her head, laughing through her tears. "It's perfect. It's the most perfect gift anyone has ever given me." She closed the distance between them and, without thinking, threw her arms around his neck, hugging him tightly. For a second, Caleb went rigid, clearly not accustomed to spontaneous displays of affection. But then his arms rose hesitantly, wrapping around her waist, pulling her closer. They stayed like that for long moments, Sophie with her face buried in his chest, inhaling the scent of soap and something musky that was uniquely his. Caleb rested his chin on top of her head, his arms tightening as if afraid she might disappear. "Thank you," Sophie whispered against his sweater. "You don't need to thank me." His voice was hoarse, vibrating through his chest to her. Sophie pulled back just enough to look at his face. He was watching her with an intensity that made her knees weak. Desire, yes, but also tenderness. Care. Something far more dangerous than simple physical attraction. Without thinking about the consequences, she rose on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek. Her lips landed near his jawline, where the stubble scratched lightly. The touch was brief, chaste, innocent. But nothing between them was truly innocent. Sophie felt Caleb shiver under her lips, felt his breath hitch, felt his hands tighten on her waist reflexively. When she pulled away, his eyes were dark, pupils dilated, lips parted. "Sophie." Her name came out as warning or plea. She wasn't sure which. "Sorry," she whispered. But she didn't look sorry. "I just wanted to really thank you." Caleb stared at her for another long moment, some internal battle waging behind those stormy grey eyes. Then, slowly, his hand slid from her waist, releasing her. "There's more," he said, his voice still unsteady. "Come." He guided her to the workbench, where there were 3 large boxes wrapped in simple craft paper. Sophie looked at him questioningly. "Open them," Caleb encouraged, almost eager now. Sophie unwrapped the first box. Inside, perfectly organized, were tubes of professional-grade oil paints, colors she could never have afforded before, rare and expensive pigments. The second box contained handcrafted brushes, each made with exceptional quality natural bristles. The third revealed Belgian linen canvases stretched on fine wood frames. "Caleb," her voice broke. "This must have cost a fortune. Money means nothing if it doesn't serve to make someone happy." He touched her face gently, his thumb wiping away a tear that was falling. "And I want to make you happy, Sophie, even if I don't really know how." She covered his hand with hers, pressing it against her cheek. "You're doing more than you realize." They remained like that, sharing the space, sharing the silence, sharing something fragile and new that was beginning to grow between them, like seedlings after a harsh winter. "Stay with me here today," Sophie asked impulsively. "Paint with me. Just for today, forget the company, business, all the responsibilities. Let's just create." Caleb hesitated. She could see the conflict in his eyes. The man he'd become warring against the man he'd been before, locking that part of himself away. "I don't know if I still can," he admitted. "It's been so long." "Then we'll relearn together." Sophie intertwined their fingers, gently pulling him toward the easels. No pressure, no expectations, just you, me, and the colors. He let himself be guided, and Sophie saw the exact moment something gave way inside him. When the armor developed another crack, and the real man underneath began to emerge. They spent hours there. Sophie set up her easel next to his, and both painted in comfortable silence, only occasionally sharing comments about techniques or asking opinions about a color choice. Caleb started hesitantly, his brushstrokes stiff and controlled, too thought out, too precise. But gradually, as the sun crossed the sky and flooded the studio with golden light, he relaxed. His brushstrokes became looser, more instinctive. He allowed himself to make mistakes, allowed himself to experiment. And Sophie watched him between brushstrokes, seeing him transform before her eyes, seeing the ruthless CEO disappear and someone younger, more vulnerable, more authentic take his place. When they finally paused, it was past 3 in the afternoon. Their canvases were stained with colorful explorations. Nothing finished, just experiments, but there was life in them. There was raw and honest emotion. Caleb looked at his own canvas, abstractions in blues and violets with touches of gold, and laughed. Really laughed, the rich and genuine sound echoing through the studio. "I forgot how therapeutic this is," he admitted, turning to her with a broad smile that left her breathless. "You should do this more," Sophie said softly. "Smile, laugh, live, not just exist." He walked to her, paint staining his hands, a bit of blue on his face where he'd absent-mindedly run his fingers. He looked younger like this, stripped of rigid formality, just human and imperfect and beautifully real. "You make me want to live again," he confessed, standing so close she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Sophie smiled, raising her paint-stained hand and touching his face, leaving a crimson-red mark on his cheek. "Then live." Something changed in his look then. The heat intensified, the desire that always existed between them flaring again. His hands found her waist, pulling her closer, until their bodies touched completely. "You're killing me, Sophie," he murmured, his eyes fixed on her lips. "Slowly, beautifully killing me." "Then kiss me," she challenged, her heart thundering. "Stop fighting this and just kiss me." For a moment she thought he would. She saw the intention in his eyes, felt his hands tighten on her waist, felt his breath against her lips, but then he pulled back, only inches but enough to break the spell. "Not yet," he said, and there was regret in his voice. "When I kiss you again, Sophie, it won't be on impulse. It'll be because I'm ready to give you everything, and I'm not there yet. Almost, but not yet." Disappointment washed through Sophie, but also respect. He was fighting his own battles, facing his own demons, and she could wait, could give him time. "Okay," she whispered. "I can wait." He touched her face once more, his thumb tracing her cheek. "Not much longer, I promise." And seeing the burning sincerity in his eyes, Sophie believed him. The following week passed in a haze of stolen moments and growing connections. Caleb started coming home earlier, seeking out Sophie in the studio, where she spent afternoons painting. They talked about everything and nothing, childhoods, abandoned dreams, favorite books, secret fears. Each conversation was a layer removed, a wall torn down. Touches became more frequent, more natural, his hand landing on her shoulder as he passed, their fingers meeting when reaching for the same brush, their bodies gravitating toward each other in any shared space, like magnets unable to resist the pull. The sexual tension grew like a slow fire, burning constantly beneath the surface of every interaction. Sophie saw it in the way his eyes devoured her when he thought she wasn't looking, felt it in the way his breath hitched when she casually touched his arm, knew it by the way he sometimes pulled away abruptly, as if needing physical distance to maintain control. And then came the invitation. Montgomery Foundation Charity Gala, Caleb announced during dinner, the meals they now shared sitting at opposite ends of the absurdly long table, but still closer than at the beginning. "It's this Saturday. Annual event. Big corporate thing. I need you to go with me." Sophie set down her fork, studying him. As your fake wife. As my wife, he corrected, and there was weight in those words. Sophie, I know we started this the wrong way, but things have changed. For me, at least. And I want to have you by my side, not as a contract, but as a partner. Her heart leapt. Partner? Caleb held her gaze across the length of the table. I'm still figuring out what that means, but I know I don't want to pretend you don't matter anymore. Sophie smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. Then I'll go, but I need a dress. Already taken care of. A mischievous smile touched his lips. Margaret has your measurements. Something will arrive tomorrow. Confident, aren't you? Hopeful, he corrected, and the vulnerability in that admission disarmed her completely. The dress that arrived the next day was stunning. Liquid silk in an emerald green tone that matched her eyes perfectly, with a deep but elegant V neckline, and a side slit that revealed one leg when she walked. It came with silver high heels and discreet but clearly expensive jewelry. Sophie got ready with Margaret's help, who smiled knowingly as she pinned Sophie's long curls into a loose low bun, leaving some strands to frame her face. Soft but sophisticated makeup enhanced her eyes and left her lips in a natural pink tone. When she came down the stairs, Caleb was waiting in the hall, and the way he looked at her made all the hours of preparation worthwhile. He was paralyzed, his eyes traveling over every inch of her with a hungry intensity that made her skin burn. He wore an impeccable black tuxedo that molded to his body in ways that should be illegal, his hair perfectly combed back, but Sophie already preferred it disheveled like it got in the studio. "My God," Caleb murmured as she approached. His voice was hoarse, his eyes dark. I have no words." "Beautiful works?" Sophie suggested with a shy smile. "Beautiful doesn't do you justice." He extended his hand, helping her down the last steps. When their fingers touched, she felt the familiar electric current pass between them. "You're absolutely stunning. I'm going to spend the whole night fending off men." "Possessive?" she teased, arching an eyebrow. His eyes gleamed dangerously. "When it comes to you, you're discovering that, yes." The event was in the ballroom of a 5-star hotel downtown. The place was packed with corporate elite, women in expensive dresses, men in impeccable tuxedos, all holding champagne flutes and exchanging calculated smiles while networking disguised as charity. Caleb kept Sophie close, his hand on the small of her back as they navigated the crowd. He introduced her as "my wife Sophie," with pride in his voice she'd never heard before, and it made something tighten deliciously in her chest. They talked with businessmen, politicians, philanthropists. Sophie remained comfortable, contributing to conversations with intelligence and natural grace that made Caleb look at her with even more admiration. She wasn't just beautiful, she was eloquent, insightful, capable of holding discussions about art and politics and economics with equal ease. "You're incredible," he whispered in her ear, during a pause between conversations, his lips dangerously grazing her earlobe. "Half these men are going to try to steal you just after hearing you speak." Sophie turned to him, smiling. "Good. Makes you appreciate what you have." "Oh, I appreciate it." His eyes burned on her, more than you can imagine. That's when the music started. A live orchestra played on stage, and couples began moving to the dance floor. Caleb extended his hand, formal but with warmth in his eyes. "Will you grant me this dance, Mrs. Montgomery?" Sophie placed her hand in his, letting him lead her to the center of the floor. When they turned to face each other, when his hand wrapped around her waist and the other held her hand, when their bodies drew close with only inches separating them, the world around them disappeared. The music was slow, sensual, strings intertwining in a melody that seemed made for bodies moving together in the dark. They began to dance. Caleb led her with confidence that came from years of mandatory ballroom dancing lessons. But there was something different now. It wasn't mechanical or rehearsed. It was intimate. Every movement of his body guiding hers, every pressure of his hand communicating direction, created a silent conversation more eloquent than words. "You dance well," Sophie murmured, her eyes fixed on his. "Only when the partner is worth it." His hand on her waist tightened slightly, pulling her imperceptibly closer. "And you, Sophie, are worth so much more than that." The heat of his touch burned through the thin silk of the dress. Sophie felt each finger individually pressing her skin, felt the heat of his body radiating, felt the hardness of his muscles when their bodies occasionally grazed during a turn. The music changed subtly, the rhythm slowing even more. Caleb took advantage, closing the distance between them until they were pressed together, his chest pressing against her breasts, their thighs grazing with each step. Sophie's breathing was irregular. She could feel his heart beating against hers through the layers of clothing, could see the vein pulsing in his neck, could feel the undeniable evidence of his desire pressing against her stomach. "Caleb," his name came out trembling. "I know." His voice was hoarse, dangerously low. The hand holding hers tightened, intertwining their fingers. The other slid down her back, exploring the bare skin exposed by the neckline, leaving trails of fire wherever it touched. Sophie trembled, arching involuntarily against him. The movement pressed their bodies even closer together, drawing a guttural sound from his throat. "You're torturing me," he murmured, his lips grazing the shell of her ear. "Dancing like this with me, feeling like this, smelling like this. Then kiss me," she challenged, echoing the words from the studio. But this time, there was more urgency, more need. "Please, Caleb." He pulled back just enough to look at her face. His eyes were almost black now, pupils dilated with desire. He studied every feature of hers, the parted lips, the flushed cheeks, the green eyes shining with promise and plea. "Not here," he finally said. And there was promise in those words. "Not with all these eyes on us. When I kiss you again, Sophie, I want to be able to touch you the way I'm dying to touch you, and I won't be able to stop at just a kiss." Her stomach twisted with anticipation. "Who said I want you to stop?" A slow, dangerously sensual smile curved his lips. "Be careful what you wish for." "I know exactly what I wish for." The music ended, but they remained there, locked in each other's gaze, bodies still pressed together, breaths mingled. Around them other couples applauded politely, but Sophie barely registered it. That's when a female voice, shrill and deliberately sweet, cut through the moment. "Caleb Montgomery." "It's been a while." They separated reluctantly. A woman was approaching, blonde, stunning in a red dress that hugged every curve, with calculating blue eyes fixed on Caleb like a predator assessing prey. "Victoria," Caleb said, and there was coldness in his voice that Sophie hadn't heard in days. His hand found Sophie's waist possessively. "This is Sophie, my wife." Victoria blinked, genuine surprise crossing her perfectly made-up face. "Wife? I didn't know you'd gotten married." Her eyes traveled over Sophie evaluatively, clearly looking for flaws. "How unexpected." "Very unexpected," Caleb agreed, but his voice carried satisfaction. "And very welcome." Victoria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Well, congratulations then. I hope she knows what she's getting into." "She knows exactly," Sophie replied softly, but there was steel in her voice. She extended her hand. "And you are?" "Oh, sorry. Victoria Sterling, Caleb's ex." She shook Sophie's hand with more force than necessary. "We dated for 3 years. I thought we'd get married, but—" She shrugged delicately. Apparently, he wanted something different. Sophie felt Caleb tense beside her, but she just smiled calmly. "Different and better, I imagine. After all, he chose to marry me." Victoria blinked, clearly not expecting a sharp response. Her mask of sympathy slipped slightly. "Well, we'll see how long it lasts. Caleb has a history of losing interest." "Victoria," Caleb said, his voice dangerously low. "You're being inappropriate." "Just honest, darling." She touched his arm with a familiarity that made Sophie see red. "You know it's true." Sophie stepped forward, placing herself between Victoria and Caleb. She looked the other woman in the eyes with an intensity that made Victoria involuntarily step back. "Let me be clear," Sophie said, her voice soft but loaded with dangerous promise. "Caleb is no longer your darling. He's my husband. And if you touch him again or question our marriage, you'll discover I'm much less polite than I seem." Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it. For a moment, she just stared at Sophie with a mixture of shock and anger. Then, without another word, She spun on her heels and disappeared into the crowd. Sophie turned to Caleb, finding him looking at her with an expression that could only be described as reverent admiration. "That was," he began. "Possessive," Sophie offered, echoing the earlier conversation. "Incredibly sexy." He pulled her against him abruptly, both arms around her, not caring who was watching. "You demolished her." Sophie smiled, her hands rising to his chest. "Nobody touches what's mine." "Yours?" His eyebrows rose, but there was obvious pleasure in his expression. "Mine," she confirmed with conviction. "If you haven't figured it out yet, Caleb Montgomery, I don't share." He laughed, that rich and genuine sound she loved drawing from him. Then, leaning in, he kissed her forehead with a tenderness that contrasted with the intensity of the previous moment. "Let's go home," he whispered against her skin. "Now." And in the way he looked at her, in the dark promise in his eyes, Sophie knew something would change tonight. Finally. The ride back to the mansion was torturous. Sitting in the back seat of the limousine, separated by only inches but seeming like miles, the tension was so thick Sophie could barely breathe. Every bump in the road made their bodies accidentally graze, sending waves of heat through her. Caleb kept his gaze fixed on the window, jaw tight, hands closed into fists on his thighs, as if fighting the urge to reach for her. The light from street lamps passed over his face at intervals, revealing the tension there. Desire, restraint, something wild, fighting to break free. Sophie watched his profile, memorizing every detail. The strong line of his nose, the dark lashes that cast shadows on his cheeks, the lips she was dying to feel on hers again. She wanted to touch him, wanted to crawl across the seat and nestle in his lap, wanted to end this absurd distance between them. As if sensing her gaze, Caleb turned his head. Their eyes met, and the air practically crackled. "Don't look at me like that," he said, his voice hoarse. "Like what?" "Like you want me, as much as I want you." His hands clenched tighter. "Because if you look at me like that for one more second, I'm going to tell the driver to stop the car and take you right here. Consequences be damned." Sophie's stomach twisted deliciously. "And if I don't care about consequences?" A muscle pulsed in his jaw. "Sophie, I told you to kiss me on the dance floor. You said not there. We're alone now." She leaned slightly toward him, their knees touching. "So kiss me, Caleb. Stop fighting and just kiss me." For an endless moment, he just stared at her. Then, with a guttural sound that was half moan, half growl, he moved. His hands found her face, pulling her to him as his lips captured hers in a kiss that was anything but gentle. It was raw hunger, years of loneliness and denial exploding all at once. Their mouths collided with desperate urgency, tongues tangling, teeth grazing lips. Sophie moaned against his mouth, her hands grabbing the lapels of his tuxedo, pulling him closer. Caleb deepened the kiss, tilting her head back for better access, completely dominating. One of his hands slid from her face to the nape of her neck, fingers tangling in her hair and undoing the careful bun. The other traveled down her neck, her collarbone, stopping dangerously close to her dress's neckline. The car made a turn, throwing them even more against each other. Sophie ended up practically in his lap, her breasts pressed against his chest, her legs tangled with his. She could feel his erection, hard and insistent, pressing against her hip. "Caleb," she gasped when he left her mouth to trail burning kisses along her jaw, her neck nibbling lightly at the curve where her shoulder met her neck. "You drive me crazy," he murmured against her skin, his voice vibrating through her. "Since that first kiss in the chapel, I want you so badly I can barely think about anything else." His words set her on fire. Sophie arched against him, seeking more contact, more friction, more of him. But before they could go further, the car stopped smoothly. They'd arrived home. Caleb pulled away with visible effort, his breathing irregular, his lips swollen and red from kissing. He helped Sophie minimally compose herself, adjusting her dress, trying to comb her hair with his fingers, but they both knew anyone who saw them would know exactly what they'd been doing. The driver opened the door discreetly, keeping his eyes down professionally. Caleb got out first, then extended his hand to help Sophie. When their fingers touched, the electricity between them almost visibly sparked. They entered the mansion in charged silence. Margaret had already gone to sleep, the main lights off, only soft night lighting bathing the hall in amber tones. The house was silent, only the sound of their breathing and Sophie's heels clicking against the marble. Caleb stopped at the foot of the staircase, turning to her. The dim light accentuated the shadows on his face, making him look wilder, more dangerous. "Sophie," he began, his voice rough, "if you come upstairs with me now, I won't be able to control myself. I won't be able to be gentle or go slow. I want you too much for too long." Her heart thundered against her ribs. Who said I want gentle or slow? Something dark and hungry passed through his eyes. "You need to be sure. Because once we start, once I have you..." "I'm sure." Sophie took a step toward him, closing the distance. Her hands rose to his chest, feeling his heart beating as wildly as hers. "I've been sure since that first kiss, since you showed me the studio, since every conversation, every touch, every shared moment. I want you, Caleb, completely." He studied her for one more second, searching for any hesitation. Then, finding none, he picked her up in one motion. Sophie let out a sound of surprise, her arms automatically circling his neck. He carried her upstairs easily, his muscles flexing under the tuxedo, but instead of going to her room, he turned in the opposite direction, toward the master suite. To his room. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, entering the room and kicking the door closed behind them. The bedroom was huge, decorated in shades of grey and white, with a king-size bed dominating the space. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the illuminated city in the distance, but Sophie barely registered the details. Her attention was entirely on Caleb as he set her on her feet beside the bed. Her hands immediately went to the buttons of his tuxedo, but he stopped them, covering them with his. "Let me see you first," he asked, his voice hoarse with desire. "Let me take off this dress and see what's been haunting my dreams." Sophie nodded, barely able to breathe. Caleb walked around her until he was behind her, his fingers finding the discreet zipper at the back of the dress. He opened it slowly, tortuously slow, revealing inch by inch of pale skin. When the zipper reached the base of her back, Caleb leaned in and kissed her spine, his lips tracing the path the zipper had made. Sophie trembled, arching under his touches. "You're so beautiful," he murmured against her skin, his hands pushing the dress straps down. The silk slid down her body, falling in a pool at her feet, leaving her in only black lace lingerie and high heels. Caleb came around again, stopping in front of her. His eyes devoured her, traveling over every curve, every line, every piece of exposed skin. She saw his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed with difficulty. "Perfect," he said simply. "Absolutely perfect." Sophie touched the buttons of his tuxedo again, and this time he didn't stop her. She undid them one by one, revealing the white shirt underneath, then worked on the shirt buttons too. When she finally pushed both pieces off his shoulders, revealing the muscular torso she'd only guessed at under his clothes, she had to pause just to admire. He was beautiful. All defined muscle, tanned skin, a line of dark hair descending from his chest to disappear under the waistband of his pants. There was a pale scar near his heart, but Sophie didn't ask, just traced it gently with her fingers. Caleb shivered under her touch, his hands finding her waist, pulling her against him. Bare skin against bare skin was electric. He leaned in and kissed her again, slower this time but no less intense. Their tongues danced as their hands explored, memorizing every touch, every sound, every tremor. He guided her backward until her legs touched the bed. She sat on the edge, looking up as he remained before her, imposing and beautiful. Her hands went to his belt, but he stopped them again. "Are you sure?" he asked one more time, his eyes searching hers. "Sophie, once we start, you'll be mine, completely." "I'm already yours," she whispered. "Stay with me tonight. I want you, Caleb. All of you." Something broke in him then. Seeing the absolute certainty in her eyes, the total trust she placed in him, any restraint that remained shattered. He leaned in, capturing her lips once more as he gently laid her on the mattress. His body covered hers, his weight delicious, his hardness pressing exactly where she needed it. His hands explored every inch of her, sliding along her arms, her ribs, the curve of her waist. He unfastened her bra with a skill that should have bothered her, but didn't. When she was finally exposed, his eyes devoured her with a reverence that made tears burn in hers. "So beautiful," he murmured, leaning in to kiss the valley between her breasts, then each one alternately, his tongue circling her nipples until they were hard and sensitive. Sophie arched, moaning loudly, her hands burying in his hair. Sensations coursed through her body like an electric current, each touch of his igniting nerve endings she didn't even know she had. He continued descending, kissing her stomach, her waist, gently nibbling her hips as his hands removed the last piece of clothing between them. When she was completely naked before him, vulnerable and exposed, he paused just to look. "Perfect," he repeated, absolute admiration in his voice. Then he stripped off the rest of his clothes, and it was Sophie's turn just to look. He was glorious, all masculine power and barely contained desire. She reached out, touching him shyly, fascinated by the softness of skin over the hardness beneath. Caleb groaned, his eyes closing briefly. "You're going to kill me, then die happy," she whispered, pulling him back to her. He positioned himself between her legs, supporting himself on his elbows so as not to crush her. Their faces were inches apart, breaths mingled, hearts beating in uneven unison. "It might hurt at first," he warned gently, "but I'll try to be careful. Tell me if you need me to stop. It won't hurt." Sophie touched his face, running her fingers along his jawline. "Because it's you. And I trust you completely." Those words broke his last resistance. Slowly, carefully, he filled her. Sophie held her breath as she felt Caleb begin to enter her. There was pressure, a feeling of fullness that was strange but not uncomfortable. He moved slowly, giving her time to adjust, his eyes fixed on hers, searching for any sign of pain. "Breathe," he whispered, his voice tense from the effort of controlling himself. "Relax for me, love." The endearment completely disarmed her. Sophie took a deep breath, forcing her muscles to relax, and felt her body begin to accommodate him. Caleb continued, inch by inch, kissing her face, her neck, murmuring soft words against her skin. When he was finally completely inside her, they both paused. His eyes searched hers, raw vulnerability there. "Does it hurt?" he asked, concern tinging his voice. "No." Sophie arched experimentally, getting used to the feeling of him inside her, filling her in ways that went beyond the physical. "It's intense, but good. So good." Something shifted in his eyes then. The care remained, but the desire intensified. He began to move, withdrawing almost completely before returning in slow and controlled movement. He established a deliberate rhythm, each thrust deep and measured, his eyes never leaving hers. Sophie clung to his shoulders, her nails marking his skin as sensations built inside her. Each movement of his created delicious friction, igniting nerves that sent waves of pleasure through her body. She moaned low, surprised by the intensity, by the way her body responded to his instinctively. "You're so tight," Caleb groaned, his voice guttural. "So perfect. Made for me." His words set her on fire even more. Sophie wrapped her legs around his waist, pulling him deeper, wanting more, needing more. Caleb responded by increasing the rhythm, his thrusts becoming stronger, more urgent. The sound of bodies meeting filled the room, mixed with their gasping breaths and low moans. Caleb leaned in, capturing her lips in a desperate kiss while his hips continued the hypnotic movement. One of his hands slid between their bodies, finding the sensitive spot where they were joined, and caressing with perfect pressure. Sophie cried out against his mouth, her body arching violently as pleasure exploded through her. It was overwhelming, consuming, unlike anything she'd experienced. Waves and more waves coursed through her body, making her tremble and tighten around him. "That's it," Caleb encouraged, his voice hoarse, watching her shatter in his arms. "Let me feel you so beautiful like this, so perfect." But he didn't stop. He continued moving through her orgasm, prolonging the pleasure until she was almost crying from the intensity. Then, as she started to come down, he changed the angle slightly, hitting a spot inside her that made her eyes widen. "Oh, God!" she gasped, her nails scratching his back. "Caleb, I can't. It's too much." "Yes, you can." He kissed her neck, nibbling lightly. "One more time, love. Come for me one more time." He continued the relentless movement, his hips slamming against hers while his hand maintained perfect pressure. Sophie felt the pleasure building again, more intense than before, like a rising tide about to break. When it finally broke, it was even more powerful. Her entire body convulsed, a scream tearing from her throat as pleasure consumed her completely. She tightened around Caleb so strongly that he moaned loudly, his own thrusts becoming erratic. "Sophie," he growled, his body tense as a violin string. "I'm going to... Where do you want?" "Inside," she gasped, without thinking, her legs tightening around him. "Stay inside me." With a guttural moan that was part relief, part surrender, Caleb buried himself deeply one last time and shattered. Sophie felt him pulsing inside her, felt his warmth filling her, and something deeply primitive and satisfying flooded through her. He collapsed on her, careful not to completely crush her, but clearly unable to move. Their breaths were ragged, sweaty bodies stuck to each other, hearts beating unevenly. They stayed like that for long moments, just catching their breath, letting reality slowly return. Sophie stroked his back absent-mindedly, feeling his muscles trembling under her palm, feeling his weight on her like a comforting blanket. Finally, Caleb lifted his head, his eyes searching hers with concern. "Are you okay? Did I hurt you?" Sophie smiled, touching his face gently. "I'm more than okay. I'm speechless." He smiled then, that rare and genuine smile that transformed his face. "Speechless? The eloquent artist speechless? You stole all my words." She pulled him into another kiss, softer now, loaded with tenderness instead of urgency. Caleb withdrew from her carefully, making her shiver from the sensitivity. He pulled her against his chest, wrapping her completely in his arms, tangling their legs. Sophie nestled into him, her head resting on his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought love could be like this," Caleb murmured, kissing the top of her head. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her back. "Like what?" Sophie asked sleepily, pleasure and exertion finally weighing on her. "Real, tangible, something I can hold and feel." His voice was thick with emotion. "You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever." Sophie lifted her head, looking at him with serious eyes. "What?" "Hope." He touched her face, his thumb tracing her cheek. "The ability to feel again. You broke down all the walls I built, Sophie. You made me remember what it's like to be alive." Tears burned in her eyes. "You did the same for me. You gave me reason to believe that arranged marriages can become true love. We're here, together, and that's all that matters." He kissed her softly, a seal of promise. Sophie snuggled back against him, feeling safe, protected, loved in ways she'd never imagined possible. Sleep was beginning to pull at her, but she fought against it, wanting to memorize this moment. The warmth of his arms, the sound of his breathing, the feeling of completely belonging to someone who completely belonged to her. "Caleb?" she murmured against his chest. "I don't regret anything. The marriage, the choice, meeting you. You're worth every sacrifice." His arms tightened around her, almost painfully. "I don't deserve you, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to." "You already do." Sophie kissed his chest right over his heart. "Just by being who you are, just by letting me see the real man beneath all that armor." They fell silent after that, just existing together in the dark, their bodies intertwined, their souls connected in ways that transcended the physical. The outside world didn't matter, not the circumstances of how they'd gotten married, not the contracts or arrangements. Only this mattered, two hearts finding each other and choosing to stay. In the early morning, Sophie woke briefly, disoriented for a moment until she realized where she was. Caleb slept beside her, one arm still firmly around her waist, even unconsciously, as if afraid she might disappear. His face was relaxed in sleep. Looking younger, the worry lines softened. She watched him for long moments, memorizing every detail. She thought about how she'd gotten here, from the fear and anger of that first morning in the chapel to the absolute love she felt now. It had been a short journey in time, but epic in transformation. Caleb stirred, his eyes opening slowly. When he saw her looking, he smiled, that sleepy, intimate smile that was only hers. "Hi," he murmured, his voice hoarse from sleep. "Hi," she responded softly. "Are you okay?" "Sore," Sophie considered. There was tenderness, yes, but it was good, a physical reminder of everything they'd shared. "A little, but it's good." Caleb pulled her closer, kissing her forehead. "Rest. Tomorrow we'll spend the whole day in bed if you want." "Promise?" she teased. "Threat," he responded with a mischievous smile that made her stomach flip again. Sophie laughed softly, nestling back into his chest. This time, when sleep came, she surrendered without resisting, safe in the arms of the man who had become her entire world. And when the sun rose hours later, bathing the room in golden light, it found them still intertwined. Two hearts finally complete, two souls finally home. The following months were absolute transformation. The mansion that had once seemed like a cold mausoleum now pulsed with life. Sophie filled the empty rooms with her paintings. Fresh flowers appeared on every table thanks to her morning visits to the market, and the sound of laughter, hers, his, both together, echoed through hallways that had once known only silence. Caleb changed in ways that left even Margaret speechless. He came home earlier, sometimes in the middle of the afternoon, just to spend time with Sophie. He delegated more responsibilities, trusted his team, prioritized life over profit. He laughed more. He smiled constantly. He touched Sophie at every opportunity. Hands intertwined during meals, arms around her while they cooked together, stolen kisses in hallways. They'd established routines that became sacred rituals. Mornings started intertwined in bed, awakening slowly with lazy kisses and whispered conversations. Coffee taken together on the veranda when weather permitted, Sophie reading while Caleb reviewed documents, but constantly getting distracted just to watch her. Afternoons in the studio, both painting side by side, soft music playing, occasional paint wars ending in color-covered kisses. Nights were their favorite. Dinners prepared together, where Caleb revealed himself to be a surprisingly competent cook, and Sophie discovered that burning toast was her only culinary talent. Conversations that stretched for hours about everything and nothing. And then, always, the shared bed where they made love with decreasing urgency but growing intimacy, each touch revealing a new aspect of each other, each night deepening the already deep connection. Sophie had never been so happy. She woke every day amazed that this was her life, that the cold, distant man from the arranged marriage had become her greatest confidant, her passionate lover, her best friend. Caleb seemed equally transformed. He talked more, smiled easily, even joked. Something Sophie suspected no one in his corporate life had witnessed. He told stories from his childhood that explained a lot. Distant parents more interested in mergers than their son, an older brother who died in an accident when Caleb was 16, constant pressure to perform, to be perfect, to never show weakness. "That's why you closed yourself off," Sophie had said one night, tracing the scar near his heart, the result of surgery after the accident that also took his brother. "Because you learned that loving meant losing." Yes, he'd captured her hand, kissing her fingers. "Until you. You taught me that loving can also mean gaining everything." It was during one of those perfect days, 3 months after that first night together, that everything changed. Sophie woke up nauseous. She ran to the bathroom and vomited violently, her stomach turning in waves. Caleb appeared immediately, holding her hair back, murmuring comforting words, his hand making gentle circles on her back. "Must be something I ate," Sophie said weakly when she finally stopped. But even saying it, something clicked in her mind. She did quick mental calculations, her heart racing. "I'll call the doctor," Caleb said worriedly, helping her up. "No." Sophie grabbed his arm, her eyes wide. "Caleb, when was my last—" She didn't finish, but saw understanding cross his face. "Do you think—" He looked shocked, hopeful, terrified all at once. "I don't know, but maybe we should check." Margaret was discreetly sent to buy pregnancy tests. The wait was agony. Caleb pacing back and forth in the suite, Sophie sitting on the edge of the bed with trembling hands, both caught between hope and fear. When Margaret returned with a discreet bag, Sophie locked herself in the bathroom. Her hands shook so badly she could barely open the box. She followed the instructions, then placed the test on the counter and waited through the 3 longest minutes of her life. Caleb knocked on the door softly. "Sophie, are you okay in there?" "Still waiting," she called back, her voice unsteady. She watched the test as if she could force it to reveal an answer faster through pure willpower. Her heart beat so hard she could hear it in her ears. Thoughts raced through her mind. What if she was pregnant? Were they ready? They'd only just started building their relationship. But at the same time, the idea of carrying Caleb's child, of creating a life together, filled her with unexpected joy. Her phone alarm went off. 3 minutes. With trembling hands, Sophie picked up the test and looked. 2 lines. Positive. Her breath caught. Tears filled her eyes instantly, not from sadness but from overwhelming joy mixed with absolute terror. She was pregnant. She was going to have a baby. Caleb's baby. "Sophie." His voice was more insistent now, concern clear. "Please let me in." With shaky legs, Sophie unlocked the door. Caleb entered immediately, his eyes searching her face, reading the tears. "What is it? Is everything okay?" He touched her face, wiping away tears with his thumbs. Sophie couldn't speak. She just extended the test to him with a trembling hand. Caleb looked at the small plastic device, his eyes traveling over the 2 distinct lines. For a long moment, he just stood there, processing. His face went through countless expressions: shock, disbelief, fear, and then pure joy. "A baby?" His voice came out hoarse, broken with emotion. We're pregnant," Sophie confirmed, more tears streaming. "I'm pregnant." A sound escaped him, half laugh, half sob. He pulled Sophie against him, hugging her so tight it almost hurt, his face buried in her hair. She felt his body tremble, felt moisture against her temple, and realized with shock that he was crying. "Caleb." She pulled back to see his face, and what she saw there broke and remade her simultaneously. Tears ran freely down his cheeks, but he was smiling, that wide, uninhibited smile she loved drawing from him. "Our baby," he said reverently, his hand sliding to her still flat stomach, settling there as if he could already feel the life growing. "Sophie, we're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" She needed to hear it, needed to be sure. "Happy," he laughed through tears. I have no words. Terrified, yes, but so incredibly happy my chest hurts." He kissed her then, deep, passionate, loaded with love and promise. "I want everything with you. A child, 10 children, this home, this love, everything." Sophie laughed through her own tears, relieved and elated and completely in love. "Let's start with 1 and see how it goes." They laughed together. Then he picked her up and carried her back to the bed, laying her down gently as if she were made of glass. He lay beside her, his hand never leaving her stomach. "There's life here," he murmured in wonder. "Our life. Half you, half me. I hope it has your eyes," Sophie said softly, covering his hand with hers. "I hope it has your heart." He kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her lips. "And your strength, and your kindness, and everything that makes you you." They stayed like that for hours, just talking about the suddenly very real future ahead of them. Names were thrown around and discarded. They discussed colors for the baby's room. Caleb swore he'd read every book on parenting ever written. Sophie laughed at him, but was equally terrified and excited. "Are we going to be good at this?" she eventually asked, vulnerability breaking through. "I don't know." Caleb was honest. "I never had good examples. My parents were distant, cold. But I know one thing. I'm going to love this child with everything I am. I'm going to be present. I'm going to be the father I never had. And I'm going to love them with all my heart," Sophie promised. "We'll figure it out together. We'll make mistakes and learn and give this child everything we both didn't have. Unconditional love, constant presence, a home full of warmth." "Deal," Caleb agreed, sealing it with a kiss. The following months were a whirlwind. Medical appointments, where they heard the heartbeat for the first time, and both cried. Ultrasound, revealing the small life growing, arms and legs forming. Sophie's belly gradually expanding. Caleb unable to stop touching it, talking to the baby, kissing the stretched skin. He was present in every moment, holding her hair during morning sickness that extended for weeks, massaging her swollen feet, waking in the middle of the night to fetch the strangest food cravings. He talked to her belly constantly, reading stories, singing off-key songs that made Sophie laugh. "You're going to be an amazing dad," she said one night, watching him seriously discussing business strategies with her 6-month belly. He looked up, smiling. "And you're already an amazing mom. Our daughter is lucky." "Daughter?" Sophie arched an eyebrow. "We still don't know the sex." "I know," he said confidently. "It's a girl. I can feel it." And he was right. 2 years later, the June sun bathed the small chapel garden with golden light. It wasn't the same grey, cold November chapel where it all began. This one was different. Smaller, intimate, with colourful stained glass casting rainbows over the light wood pews. Wildflowers decorated every surface, their vibrant colours reflecting the joy that filled the air. Sophie stood in the small vestibule, adjusting the simple white dress she'd chosen. Nothing like the elaborate silk dress from the first time. This one was light, flowing, with delicate lace on the shoulders and a skirt that danced around her knees. Her hair fell in natural waves over her shoulders, only a crown of fresh flowers as adornment. But the most important detail was in her arms. Victoria was 1.5 years old, all dark curls inherited from her father and vibrant green eyes from her mother. She wore a matching little white dress, absent-mindedly chewing on a cookie while observing everything with characteristic curiosity. She was perfect, a perfect blend of both, with Caleb's seriousness and Sophie's spontaneity. "Ready, dear?" Margaret appeared, her eyes brimming. The housekeeper had become much more than an employee. She was an honorary grandmother, confidant, an essential part of the strange but perfect family they'd built. Sophie took a deep breath, adjusting Victoria better on her hip. "Ready." The doors opened. This time, there were guests, not many, just the people who truly mattered. Her father, now healthy thanks to the treatments Caleb had insisted on financing, sat in the first row with tears already streaming. Some of Caleb's close colleagues who'd become genuine friends. Some of the mothers of the children Sophie taught art to, who'd become her circle. Margaret and the rest of the staff who'd witnessed the transformation of them both. But Sophie had eyes only for the man at the altar. Caleb waited with the same visible nervousness from 2 years ago, but this time his eyes sparkled with pure joy. He wore a light grey suit, no tie, his shirt open at the collar giving him a more relaxed appearance, more himself. And when his eyes met hers, he smiled that smile that was only hers, vulnerable, passionate, completely disarmed. Sophie walked down the aisle, each step measured, Victoria babbling happily in her arms. When she reached Caleb, he immediately extended his arms. "Come to Daddy, Princess," he murmured, and Victoria promptly went, wrapping her chubby little arms around his neck. Caleb held his daughter with one arm and extended his free hand to Sophie. When their fingers intertwined, she felt that familiar electric current, only intensified by everything they'd lived through, by every obstacle overcome, by every moment of shared love. The officiant, a young priest Sophie had met through her charity classes, smiled warmly at them. "We're here today not to unite two people," he began, "but to celebrate a union that already exists. Caleb and Sophie came before us 2 years ago in a marriage of convenience. Today, they return to renew their vows, this time not out of obligation, but out of pure choice, out of love." Sophie felt tears threaten and blinked furiously. Caleb squeezed her hand, Victoria resting comfortably against his chest, nibbling the cookie and occasionally offering pieces to her father, who pretended to eat with seriousness. "Caleb," the priest said, "would you like to share your vows?" Caleb looked at Sophie with an intensity that made her heart leap. He shifted Victoria to one arm, keeping his free hand intertwined with Sophie's. "Sophie," he began, his voice hoarse with emotion, "when we got married 2 years ago, I thought I was making a business transaction. I was wrong. I was receiving a gift I didn't deserve. You." Tears flowed freely now. Sophie squeezed his hand, encouraging him to continue. "You came into my life like a storm, breaking down all the walls I'd spent years building. You made me feel when I'd sworn never to feel again. You taught me that loving isn't weakness. It's the greatest strength there is." His voice broke slightly. You gave me family, purpose, a reason to wake up smiling every day, and you gave me this little miracle. He kissed the top of Victoria's head, who is half you, half me, and completely perfect. Sophie was crying openly now, not even trying to hide her tears. So today I promise, not because a contract obliges me, but because my heart demands it, I choose you. Every day, in every way, I choose you. I love you not despite our differences, but because of them. You showed me that love is presence, is respect, is choosing the same person repeatedly. He touched her face with his free hand, his thumb wiping away her tears. You are my life, Sophie Montgomery, and I choose you, today and always. The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Even Victoria had stopped chewing, looking between her parents with a serious expression that was so Caleb, it drew laughter through the tears. Sophie, the priest said gently, your vows. Sophie took a deep breath, composing herself enough to speak. Caleb, when I agreed to marry you, it was out of desperation, out of love for my father. I didn't expect this. She gestured between them, encompassing everything, the love, the family, the life built. I didn't expect that the cold, distant man was just armor protecting the gentlest heart I've ever known. Caleb smiled through his own tears now. You surprised me at every moment, with your vulnerability hidden beneath apparent strength, with the way you learned to love not because it was easy, but because you chose to try. With how you are with our daughter. She touched Victoria's face gently. Patient, present, exactly the father you promised to be. She took both his hands now, the priest holding Victoria to allow the moment. So I promise to see you, really see you, every day. To see not just the successful CEO, but the man who paints with me in the studio. The man who sings off-key to our daughter. The man who wakes up in the middle of the night just to make sure I'm breathing. Her voice filled with emotion. You freed me, Caleb. You taught me to feel without fear. You're my best friend, my lover, my partner, and I choose you today and every day after until my last breath. There wasn't a dry eye in the chapel. Even the priest was discreetly wiping tears. The rings, he requested. Margaret approached, holding a small pillow with two simple bands, rose gold engraved with their intertwined initials and today's date. Caleb slid the ring onto Sophie's finger, his eyes fixed on hers. With this ring, I choose you. Sophie did the same, her voice firm despite the tears. With this ring, I choose you. Then, by the power vested in me, I declare you husband and wife. Again, but this time by true love. The priest smiled broadly. You may kiss your wife. Caleb didn't wait for a second authorization. He pulled Sophie against him, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was everything. Love, promise, gratitude, desire, future. It was a kiss that communicated years of emotion in seconds, that sealed vows in ways words never could. The guests applauded and whistled. Victoria, still in the priest's arms, clapped too, shouting happily, Mama, Dada, her favorite words lately. When they finally separated, both laughing and crying simultaneously, Caleb recovered his daughter, and the three stood there, a complete family, true love, the beginning of forever. The reception was in the mansion's garden, transformed for the occasion with lights hanging in trees, tables covered with white linen tablecloths, and more flowers than Sophie had ever seen in one place. But it remained intimate, just a celebration among people they loved, not a social obligation. They danced under the stars, Victoria between them, her laughter tinkling like bells. They ate cake that Caleb had helped make, with much help from Margaret. They talked and laughed and celebrated not just the wedding, but the journey that brought them there. When night fell and guests began to leave, Caleb and Sophie stood on the terrace, Victoria finally sleeping in the stroller beside them. The city lights sparkled in the distance, but their attention was only on each other. Caleb wrapped Sophie from behind, his arms around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder. Remember when I said I'd never touch you? Sophie laughed softly, turning her head to look at him. I remember. You were so arrogant. I was an idiot, he corrected, kissing her neck. But you showed me the error of my ways. With a kiss, she remembered, smiling at the memory. With many kisses. He turned her in his arms, his hands framing her face. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life kissing you, touching you, loving you. You saved me, Sophie. From a life without color, without warmth, without meaning. We saved each other, she corrected softly. Together. You gave me security to be vulnerable. I gave you permission to feel. We were mutual gifts. They looked deeply at each other, seeing not just who they were now, but who they'd been. The strangers forced to marry, the reluctant adversaries, the hesitant lovers, the committed partners, the devoted parents. Each phase brought them here, to this perfect moment. I love you, Caleb said. The words he said 100 times a day, but that never lost their weight. I love you, Sophie echoed, touching his face. More than words can express. Then show me, he challenged, that mischievous smile that always made her stomach flip appearing. Sophie rose on her tiptoes and kissed him, deep, passionate, loaded with promise. This kiss contained everything: gratitude for the past, contentment with the present, hope for the future. It was a kiss that said forever without uttering the word. When they separated, both were smiling, foreheads touching, breaths mingled. Ready for the next 50 years? Caleb asked. With you? Sophie pretended to consider, then smiled broadly. Absolutely. They remained like that under the stars. Two hearts that found each other against all odds. Two lovers who transformed obligation into choice. Two partners building a life neither had imagined possible. In the distance, Victoria stirred in her sleep, murmuring something incomprehensible. Both looked at her, their miracle, their physical promise of love, their future in small human form. Think we'll have more? Sophie asked softly. Caleb pulled her closer, his smile visible even in the dark. As many as you want. 1, 10. An entire soccer team. She laughed. Let's start with seeing how we survive, Victoria. Deal. He kissed her once more, soft and sweet. But I never stopped wanting you, Sophie. I never will. Good, she murmured against his lips. Because I'm yours. Today, tomorrow, forever. And I'm yours, he promised back. And under the starry sky, in the garden that had witnessed so many of their conversations and transformations, Caleb and Sophie sealed their promises once more, not with signatures on contracts, but with kisses that proved the truest love often comes from the most unlikely beginnings. Because sometimes the arranged marriage becomes the love of a lifetime. And sometimes the man who says, I will never touch you, becomes the one who never wants to let you go. Sometimes the truest love is born from the most unlikely places. Sophie and Caleb started as strangers, united by contract, separated by walls of ice and distrust. But they chose to see beyond the circumstances, beyond the fear. They chose to risk, to feel, to love, even when it seemed impossible. And in that daily choice, in that courage to be vulnerable, they found not only each other, but better versions of themselves. Caleb learned that true strength lies in opening your heart. Sophie discovered that love doesn't diminish when shared. It multiplies. Together they proved that happy endings aren't just for fairy tales. They're for those brave enough to transform obligation into choice, and choice into forever. And you? When was the last time you allowed someone to break down your walls? When did you choose to love, even with fear? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and become a member for early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, also click the Super Thanks button. Your support makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing stories that move you.